The briefing room was already packed when Staff Sergeant Kara Blake stepped inside, the humming fluorescent lights casting a pale glow over steaming coffee cups and clattering gear. It was just before dawn, that quiet blue edge of morning pressing against the windows while low chatter drifted between rows of chairs. The projector fan buzzed over the rustle of maps, boots shifting, and Marines settling in for another long day. Kara stood near the back, helmet tucked under one arm, her worn databook tucked against her chest like a habit she no longer thought about. Corporal Daniels noticed her first, elbowing Lance Corporal Myers with a smirk. "Well, look who showed." "Hope the babysitter sniper can keep up today," he whispered just loud enough to carry. Myers snorted, adding, "Long as she does not slow us down on the hills, we will be fine." A few Marines chuckled, more out of discomfort than cruelty, while others avoided looking her way entirely. Up front, the company commander continued the briefing, voice steady as he tapped a laser pointer against the projected map. The valley's name echoed through the room, and something in Kara's expression sharpened, just a small, controlled tightening around her eyes. She did not answer the jokes. She only stared at the terrain on the screen as if she were seeing something the rest of them had forgotten or never knew. Because to her, that valley was not just another waypoint. It was the place where 230 Marines were ambushed at dawn and where one sniper fought alone until help arrived. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Staff Sergeant Kara Blake was in her early 30s, with several deployments behind her, and a reputation that, ironically, almost no one around her understood. On paper, she was attached to the infantry battalion as a sniper and designated marksman, but day to day she blended in like any other senior NCO. She was smaller than most of the Marines, built with a lean, compact strength rather than bulk. Her hair was always pulled back tight, her posture controlled, her movement quiet. She carried no swagger, no loud presence, nothing that announced what her rifle could do in her hands. To most of the younger Marines, she was just the quiet sniper who keeps to herself, a background figure in a world of louder personalities. They underestimated her without even realizing it. Some assumed she picked up rank through easy assignments because they never saw her in the earliest years of the wars, back when firefights were daily and the Corps was stretched thin. A few joked openly that having a female sniper around was the Marine Corps checking a box. In conversations about past firefights, when Kara approached, the tone always changed, voices lowered, jokes died, and suddenly everyone remembered something on their phone. She listened more than she spoke, which only fueled their belief that she was an observer rather than a doer, someone who studied combat more than she lived it. But her past was nothing like what they imagined. In brief flashes, memories surfaced, standing on a windy range as a young rifleman, out shooting almost everyone on qualification day, her instructor quieting the lane just to watch her group. A soft-spoken officer once told her she had a gift for reading wind and distance and encouraged her to try out for the sniper platoon. She passed, not because she was loud or intimidating, but because she could stay still for hours and think 2 steps ahead. Every certificate from those grueling days remained folded inside a footlocker under her bed instead of hanging on a wall. And even now, she wiped down her rifle bolt with the same worn cloth she carried during her first deployment, a private superstition she had never explained to anyone. Her character showed itself in small, quiet moments. She once helped a nervous boot private adjust his sling, her voice steady as she showed him a trick to control his breathing. She made sure he walked away feeling capable instead of embarrassed. In every briefing room, she took the worst chair, the one by the wall or behind a pillar, because the spotlight meant nothing to her. At chow, she ate quickly and alone, then walked the perimeter of the camp, counting steps between towers and noting lines of sight without any official tasking. It was a habit born from years of knowing that the safest Marine is the one who sees everything before anyone else does. There were heavier hints beneath those habits. Late at night, under the dim lamplight of her barracks room, she cleaned her rifle with a calm, almost ritual precision. Her hand always paused over a scar on the stock, her thumb brushing it the same way someone might trace an old name on a gravestone. Near her wrist was a faded tattoo, latitude and longitude coordinates that held a story she had never shared. and tucked into her wallet was a small index card with names, handwritten and folded crisp at the corners. Before every mission, she took it out, read each name silently, then slid it back in. She carried those names the way some people carry prayers. Her chain of command knew more than the average Marine, but even they did not know everything. The company commander trusted her assessments without question, having seen her accuracy and judgment enough to know they were real. But he still did not know the full truth of her last major deployment. Only a senior sergeant major seemed to understand the weight she carried. Their brief encounters in the hallway, just a nod, nothing more, contained a recognition the younger Marines could not interpret. They shrugged it off, chalking it up to old guys respecting old friends, never imagining the battlefield that nod represented. "Have you ever stood next to someone at work or school?" the narrator asked softly, thinking you knew their story, only to realize later you had no idea who they really were. Word spread through the battalion faster than any official order. At dawn in 2 days, they would push through a narrow valley to reinforce a remote combat outpost that had been calling in reports of movement. Some Marines rolled their eyes and called it another long, boring convoy. Others swapped rumors in the barracks, saying the valley had seen enemy activity for weeks. Radios crackled with fragments of intel, half heard through thin plywood walls as boots clumped past in the dark. Kara did not deal in rumors. She dealt in angles and distances. In the cramped planning room, she stood a step back from the table, studying the satellite imagery and topographical maps more intensely than anyone else. While officers traced neat routes with dry erase markers, she followed the contour lines with her eyes, quietly tracing probable sniper positions and hidden firing points along the ridgelines. She saw narrow shelves where machine guns could dig in, shadows where rocket teams could wait, and dead ground where a convoy would be blind. No one asked for her assessment out loud. The battalion had its plan. The valley was a line on a map, a waypoint between here and there. For most of them, it was just another mission. For her, though they did not yet know it, it was something much closer to a test. In the gear staging area, the air was full of diesel fumes and nervous jokes. Marines checked their armor plates, adjusted helmet straps, and argued about playlists for the ride. Kara moved between pallets and vehicles with her helmet under one arm and her rifle case in the other, checking load plans and making mental notes about who would be where when they entered the choke point. Corporal Daniels spotted her near the back of the line, his voice rising just enough to carry. "Hey, Staff Sergeant, you can sit in the back of the convoy and drink coffee while the real fighters clear the route," he called, grinning. A few Marines laughed on reflex, the sound echoing off metal and concrete. Others shifted their weight, eyes dropping to their boots, not willing to join in but not willing to stop it either. Kara did not flinch. She stepped past a stack of ammo cans and confirmed her vehicle assignment with the platoon sergeant in a calm, even tone. Then she asked one precise question about planned overwatch points along the valley walls, her voice level and professional. The question hung in the air for a moment, unanswered, before being buried under more chatter and the slam of a tailgate. She let it go and moved on, cataloging what she needed to know. But the narrator's voice turns toward you for a moment. What would you have done in that moment? Laughed along with the crowd, or asked why she was not being heard? The day before movement, the battalion ran a final range session under a hazy sky. Heat shimmered above the ground as targets snapped up at various distances. Kara lay prone behind her rifle, the butt seated firmly in her shoulder, cheek welded to the stock as if she had grown there. Beside her, a junior Marine struggled with his breathing, shots scattering around the silhouette. "Slow it down," Kara murmured, coaching him through the rise and fall of his chest. "In through your nose, out through your mouth. Let the sight settle, do not chase it." She broke her own shot between his, the steel ringing at long distance with a flat, certain sound. When the spotting scopes shifted over to her lane, the group on her target was so tight it might have been made by a single bullet. The range went quieter without anyone meaning it to. Myers watched from a few lanes down, a knot of tension winding in his chest that had nothing to do with the heat. "Yeah, that is cute," he said loudly, shrugging. "Paper does not shoot back. Real men do it when people are firing back at them. A thin layer of laughter followed, more brittle this time, less sure of itself. Kara did not rise to it. She gave the junior Marine a small nod and reminded him about his trigger press, her tone exactly as calm as it had been before the insult. She let the comment hang and die on its own. But a couple of Marines nearby noticed something they could not quite name. They noticed that whenever she settled behind her rifle, the jokes faded and the only sounds left were steel ringing and range commands being called down the line. Outside the wire, the world was getting busier. Intelligence reports hinted at enemy fighters massing in the region, moving at night between villages and high ground. There was more chatter on the radio nets, more fragments of intercepted traffic that made the operations officers frown. Maps in the planning room filled with more colored grease pencil, more arrows and question marks. Kara studied those updates in silence, eyes running over them like she was tracing scars. She recommended specific overwatch positions along the valley's shoulders, suggested altering the convoy's timing to enter under a slightly different light, with wider spacing between vehicles. The platoon commander listened politely, nodded and jotted a note, but in the end he stuck with the standard template. Templates were safe, on paper. Templates were taught in schools. When the sun went down and most Marines drifted toward the wrecked tents or their bunks, Kara walked the motor pool alone. Engines ticked in the cooling air, and the smell of oil and dust hung low. She counted vehicles row by row, memorizing call signs painted on their sides. She pictured what it would look like when they were strung out in the valley, where each one would likely be hit first if someone were waiting. Quietly, she rehearsed what she would do when, not if, the worst happened. On the eve of movement, the chow hall buzzed with the familiar mix of nerves and bravado. Trays clattered, metal chairs scraped, and conversations swelled and broke like small waves. The valley became a story before anyone had even driven into it. Marines bragged about how fast they would dismount if bad guys showed up, or how many enemy fighters they would drop on sight. Daniels rode that current of energy like a wave. Standing halfway between tables, he raised his voice so it could ride over the clatter. "Hey, Staff Sergeant Blake," he called, turning everyone's attention without asking permission. "How many ambushes have you actually been in?" His tone stretched the word "actually," just enough to make it a challenge, not a question. A few phones came out, half in jest, someone clearly expecting a sarcastic comeback or a story they could laugh about later. The air seemed to tighten around her. Kara set her fork down and looked up, eyes clear, voice steady. "Enough to know we never joke about them," she said. For one solid heartbeat, the room shifted. The laughter died. Trays stopped moving. A couple of Marines stared at her, suddenly seeing that her answer was not a punchline. Then someone at the next table cracked a new joke about the quality of the chow, and the spell broke. The noise rushed back in, bouncing off metal and tile like nothing had happened. The narrator leans in again, not to judge but to question. Would you have stayed quiet or stood up for her? Night deepened over the base as preparations moved into their final hours. The convoy manifest went out, listing vehicle assignments and call signs. Kara's name appeared in the middle of the march order, in a vehicle that would likely have the best chance to dismount her into an overwatch position if things went bad. She read the list twice, noting who would be in front of her, who would be behind, where the command vehicle would roll. In the dim light of her room, she laid her gear out on the bunk with methodical care. Rifle, magazines, sidearm, extra batteries, water, small medical kit. She checked her radio, listened to the test tone, and clipped it where she could reach it without looking. She quietly stashed an extra tourniquet in a cargo pocket and slipped a small flare into another, a backup to the backup. Before she put her gloves on, she uncapped a pen and wrote 2 sets of numbers on the inside of her wrist. The ink bled slightly into her skin, the digits matching the faded coordinates already tattooed there. Old ground, old mistakes, old ghosts. She stared at them for a long moment, then rolled her sleeve down, hiding them again. The last night before movement offered her no real sleep. She lay on her back and listened to the base breathe. Far off, generators hummed with a steady, indifferent rhythm. Rotors thumped once or twice as a helicopter lifted and then faded into distance. Somewhere down the hall, someone laughed too loudly at a joke, the sound thin and sharp against the quiet. She finally gave up on rest, sat up, and cleaned her rifle one more time under the yellow glow of a lamp. By the time the eastern sky began to lighten, the motor pool was already alive. Engines turned over, coughing, and then settling into a heavy rumble. Dust rose in soft clouds around tires and boots. Marines hauled themselves into their vehicles, last-minute checks echoing from tailgates and turrets. Helmets buckled, gloves tightened, radios clicked as net checks rippled down the line. Kara climbed into her assigned vehicle, sliding into a seat where she could quickly move to the door. She ran her hand once along the length of her rifle, feeling the familiar imperfections in the stock, then locked it into place. Outside, Daniels walked past and slapped the side of the armored hull. "Do not worry, we will protect the sniper from the big bad hills," he called with a grin, but his voice lacked some of the carefree edge it had before. The nearest Marines chuckled, but softer now, eyes flicking between him and Kara with something more complicated than amusement. She did not bite. She looked through the thick glass at the horizon instead. The sun was barely above it yet, a pale line of gold carving through the blue. The valley lay out there somewhere, waiting, its walls and shadows already alive in her memory. As the convoy lurched forward and the base slowly receded behind them, she felt a familiar coldness settle over her chest, that precise, narrowed focus that had kept her alive once before. Engines roared. Dust billowed. Radios crackled. And 230 Marines rolled toward a valley most of them thought would be just another story to tell later, never realizing how close they were to becoming names on a folded card in someone else's wallet. The convoy pushed deeper into the desert, the morning sun climbing just high enough to burn through the haze. Mile by mile, the ground shifted beneath them. Wide stretches of open sand tightened into shallow troughs, then into sharper folds of earth. The terrain began to narrow, drawing the vehicles into a long channel of rock and dust. The walls rose on either side, uneven and jagged, cutting the sunlight into thin, slanted beams. The farther they went, the more the world changed from open desert to a dim, tunnel-like gray. Most Marines barely noticed at first. Radios hissed, tires thumped over dirt, and someone in the back hummed a tune through their teeth. But Kara felt the valley before she saw it fully. She raised her optic and began scanning the ridgelines long before anyone else sensed danger. Her eyes swept over shadow pockets tucked beneath jagged outcroppings. She tracked narrow shelves that offered perfect vantage points. She noted the angles of the sun, the lines of shadow, the unnatural stillness of certain rocks that should have reflected more light. She watched the terrain the way someone watches a memory rather than a landscape. She leaned forward slightly and called quiet distance estimates to her vehicle commander. 700 meters, right shelf. Possible dead ground at 850. Check that split ridge at your 1 o'clock. Her tone was calm, practiced, a voice she rarely used unless things mattered. She shifted her body to keep her spine pressed firmly against the interior armor, and she rested her hand lightly on her rifle, positioning it so she could bring it up in one smooth motion. These were not the habits of someone bracing for the unknown. These were the habits of someone replaying a scene she had lived before. Her breathing slowed, not out of fear, but out of preparation. A deep inhale, a controlled exhale, then a steady rhythm that looked almost like meditation. It was the same breathing she used on long shots, the same breathing she had used the last time she entered a valley like this, one the Corps did not speak about often. The vehicle lurched over a rut, jolting everyone inside. Kara's sleeve rode up just an inch, revealing more of the scarred coordinates tattooed near her wrist. The junior Marine across from her frowned, noticing the ink. He wasn't the only one. A Marine with intel experience squinted, trying to read the numbers before the sleeve fell back into place. Coordinates weren't fashionable tattoos. Coordinates meant something. The same Marine's eyes drifted to her rifle case. Inside, barely visible through the zippered opening, was a faded cloth patch, an old unit emblem, edges frayed, colors muted by sun and sweat. It wasn't a standard battalion patch. It looked like recon, or maybe even something more selective. He had seen that emblem once in a briefing about historical attachments. He stared for a second longer, unable to reconcile the quiet staff sergeant with the patch's reputation. The junior Marine she had coached earlier watched her hands, her posture, the way she scanned. She moved with an ease that didn't come from training alone. He had seen Marines preparing for trouble. She didn't look like she was preparing. She looked like she was remembering. As the valley walls tightened, unease crept through the convoy like a cold draft. The engine noises echoed strangely here, too loud, too sharp, bouncing off stone in ways that made it hard to judge distance. Kara keyed her radio. "Recommend slowing 10% and increasing interval," she said, her voice steady but edged with urgency. "Terrain's restricting movement ahead." The platoon leader acknowledged her transmission but kept the pace almost the same. Maybe he didn't want to appear rattled. Maybe he didn't want to second-guess himself in front of his Marines. Either way, the convoy continued forward as dust swirled behind them in lingering, unmoving curtains. A bird exploded from a rock face just ahead, wings beating violently into the air. A glint of metal flickered high on the ridgeline, so faint anyone else would have missed it. And the dust on the valley floor seemed to hang too perfectly still, the way dust does when something waits beneath it. The emotional temperature inside the vehicle shifted without any order being given. Conversations faded. The casual jokes died. Even Daniels and Myers, once so loud, grew quiet as they peered out their windows. The valley felt wrong now, like breath-holding. Kara's eyes locked onto a specific saddle along the rocks. It was narrow, angled, offering the longest fields of fire and the cleanest escape routes. If she were setting up an ambush, she would put her sniper team right there. Her jaw tightened. She reached up without thinking and tightened the strap of her helmet, pulling it snug against her skull. Then she checked the latch on her door. One firm push and pull, an old habit for when she needed to exit fast under fire. A brief call crackled over the radio, fragmented by static. Possible movement ahead, unable to confirm. It lasted less than 2 seconds, but it was enough. Kara clicked her safety off and quietly chambered around. The sound was barely audible beneath the engine, but she heard it, felt it, settled into it. She shifted her feet and braced one hand lightly against the door handle, positioning herself to exit the vehicle in one movement, the way she had trained herself in places where seconds meant lives. The narrator's voice slips into the quiet between heartbeats. All of this, every slow breath, every movement, every glance at the ridgelines, was not the behavior of someone about to see their first ambush. These were the instincts of someone who had survived one before, barely. The first indication wasn't sound, it was pressure. A strange, heavy stillness gripped the valley for half a heartbeat, like the earth itself was holding its breath. Then the world split open. The lead vehicles were hit first. Incoming rounds slammed into their armor with metallic shrieks, sparks erupting as bullets tore through the dust. An explosion ripped through the forward Humvee, lifting it off its wheels and throwing a curtain of debris into the sky. Machine gun fire erupted from the high ground on both sides, stitching the valley floor with fury. The convoy, strung out and pinned between rising stone walls, became a cage of choking dust and shattering noise. Marines dove from turrets and doors, some shouting range calls or enemy positions, others frozen in the chaos of it. Orders tangled in the radio, cut by static and overlapping voices. A few Marines tried to return fire blindly, rounds punching into rock but hitting nothing. Fear here was not dramatic. It was human short breaths, shaking hands, wide eyes that couldn't find where the fire was coming from. Through that chaos, Kara moved first. "Cover left, get behind the wheels, move now!" Her voice cut clean through the panic. Not loud, but sharp, precise. She shoved one Marine toward the engine block and pointed another toward the shadow of a boulder. She swung her door open and dropped low, letting the armored hull take the brunt of the fire as she scanned the ridgelines. She found the first firing point within seconds, a muzzle flash tucked beneath the lip of a rock shelf. She exhaled once, steady, and put a round through it. The machine gun went silent, replaced by the dull thud of a collapsing body, and the sharp confusion of enemy fighters repositioning. Her radio tone transformed. 2 shooters, East Ridge, 1 RPG team north wall, 300 meters. Bearing 072, machine gun on the left side, likely a PKM priority target. No hesitation. No panic. She sounded like someone slipping into a language she had spoken her whole life. But staying behind the vehicle wasn't enough. The convoy was trapped in a deadly crossfire, pinned in place. If she didn't get eyes above the valley floor, they wouldn't last minutes. Kara sprinted. She moved toward a rocky outcrop 30 meters away, the only rise that offered any angle on both ridgelines. Rounds cracked past her legs, snapping off stone and kicking dust into her face. She bounded in short bursts, timing her movements with enemy reload cycles, ducking behind broken boulders and slabs where she could get a breath before pushing again. She reached the outcrop and climbed, fingers finding holds she couldn't see, muscles moving on instinct. At the top, she threw herself behind the first patch of cover, flipped her bipod down, and found her breathing rhythm. Slow. Steady. Controlled. From the moment she settled into position, everything changed. She neutralized the PKM first, 1 shot to drop the spotter, another to silence the gunner. The squad pinned behind a burning vehicle suddenly had a clear angle to move. Their radio call came through shaky, "Whoever took that gun, thank you." She didn't answer. She was already scanning for the next threat. On the north wall, an RPG team crouched behind a rock, lining up on the command vehicle. She adjusted her elevation, calculated the wind, barely a breath of it, and fired. The rocket never launched. The Marines around the command vehicle saw the fighters fall and shouted in disbelief. Every decision she made was deliberate. She didn't just shoot what she could hit. She shot what could kill the most Marines. She calculated which threats had the best angles, which teams had spotters, which machine guns controlled the kill zones. She hunted the enemy as if she had lived in their minds for years. On the ground, Daniels crouched behind a tire, hands shaking as he tried to load a fresh magazine. He looked up during a brief break in fire and saw muzzle flashes from Kara's position, sharp, controlled bursts, followed by enemy shooters dropping one by one. His breath caught. "That's Blake," he whispered, stunned. "That's all her." Nearby, the young Marine she had coached before the mission crawled toward a better piece of cover. When he heard her call out, "Shift left, 2-man team moving on your flank," he did it instantly because her tone wasn't a suggestion. It was a lifeline. Seconds later, an enemy round hit the spot where he had been lying. He froze, realizing she had just saved him without even seeing his face. The radio waves filled with frantic voices. "Who is on Overwatch? Where are those hits coming from? Whoever's taking out the RPGs, keep going." A single answer cut through the noise. "Blake. Staff Sergeant Blake is up there," she kept firing. Adjusting for shifting dust, reading muzzle flashes. Cycling through magazines faster than she ever had, but never wasting a shot. She called for smoke at the right moment, directing Marines to pop canisters that created pockets of concealment so pinned squads could pull casualties back. Her position wasn't safe. Rounds slammed into the rocks around her, shattering stone into razor edges. One fragment cut a line across her cheek, warm blood sliding down her jaw. She wiped it away with the back of her glove without breaking focus. She shifted left to avoid a new burst of fire and continued working the problem. A scream cut through the valley. "Corman, Corman!" Kara's instinct was to look, but she forced herself not to. She stayed on her scope, teeth clenched. If she looked, she'd lose seconds. Seconds meant lives. In the middle of her shot cycle, a memory hit her. Another valley, another convoy ambushed, the flash of an explosion, the faces of Marines she couldn't save. Her hand tightened around the stock. She whispered under her breath, barely audible even to herself. Not again. The next shots were even cleaner, even faster, even colder. Below, the tone on the radio shifted without anyone announcing it. The sniper became Staff Sergeant Blake. Whoever's firing became, "She's covering us. Hold on," until support became, "Follow Blake's direction." Pinned behind a wheel well, Daniels watched her work through the smoke and chaos, awe settling into the fear. If she wasn't here, he muttered to Myers in shock, we'd all be done. Myers didn't have a joke left in him. Kara Blake, the quiet sniper they dismissed, ignored, and mocked, was the thin line between 230 Marines and annihilation, and every Marine in that valley felt it. Air support arrived first, the distant thump of rotors rolling across the valley like a promise. The gunships swept in low, their rotors chopping the smoke into spiraling columns as they unleashed controlled bursts on the high ground. Ground reinforcements followed from the rear, armored vehicles pushing forward with urgency, their turrets scanning the ridgelines. Faced with overwhelming pressure from above and behind, the enemy broke contact, slipping back into the rocks they had used as cover. Slowly, the valley exhaled. The chaos ebbed into scattered shouts for corpsmen, into groans, into the metallic clatter of weapons being checked and reloaded out of habit rather than panic. Dust hung in thick veils over the destroyed lead vehicles. Marines sat where they fell, catching their breath, counting their magazines, realizing, one by one, how close they had come to being wiped out. Kara descended from her perch last. Her boots slid down the loose gravel, her rifle hanging in her hands, barrel smoking faintly. The adrenaline that had carried her through the fight drained in a slow wave, leaving her arms trembling. She knelt once at the base of the rock to steady herself, her breath hitching before leveling out again. No one noticed the moment except the young Marine she'd saved earlier. He said nothing, just watched her with a new, quiet understanding. As Marines regrouped, conversations floated through the dust. Someone dropped the PKM at the perfect second. Whoever took out that RPG saved the CO's vehicle. There had to be a whole team up there. The company commander stepped toward Kara, his expression stripped of every assumption he'd ever had about her. His eyes moved from her rifle to the cuts on her cheek to the empty magazines clipped to her vest. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The realization was clear. She hadn't just done her job. She had held the line together. Days later, back on base, the battalion formed up at sunset on the parade deck. The same orange glow that once lit tired briefings now painted rows of Marines standing stiffly at attention. Daniels and Myers stood among them, uneasy, unsure why the formation had been called. Their jokes were gone, replaced by a nervous tension neither wanted to acknowledge. Kara stood at the front, hands behind her back, expression calm but uncomfortable. She didn't like ceremonies. She didn't like attention. But she had been ordered to be there, and so she stood quiet, steady, and unreadable. A senior officer stepped onto the small platform. Whether he was the battalion commander or a visiting colonel didn't matter. His presence carried weight. He unfolded a sheet of paper and began reading. On the morning of the engagement in the Northern Valley, elements of this battalion were ambushed by enemy forces occupying fortified positions along both ridgelines. Under overwhelming fire, with the convoy pinned and mobility lost, a lone Marine sniper established an exposed overwatch position. The words were clinical, official, heavy. Daniels felt his stomach sink. Myers swallowed hard, glancing at Kara but unable to hold the stare. The officer continued. Engaging machine gun teams, rocket-propelled grenade units, and command elements with precision. Her actions prevented catastrophic loss of life and enabled the battalion to regroup until support arrived. A silence spread through the formation, thick and consuming. Then the officer spoke her name. Staff Sergeant Kara Blake. The echo of her name seemed to ripple through the ranks. Daniels closed his eyes, realizing the story wasn't about some legend from another era. It was about the quiet woman they mocked 2 days earlier. The one who sat alone at chow, the one they thought needed protecting from the hills. The officer continued, listing her previous decorations, awards for valor under fire, commendations for actions most Marines only heard about in training scenarios. The list was longer than anyone expected, longer than any of them could have imagined for someone who moved so quietly through their day-to-day lives. Helmets dipped slightly, shoulders stiffened with something like shame. No one laughed, no one whispered. The respect settling over the formation felt almost physical, an invisible force pushing the air down around them. For the first time, Every Marine in that battalion truly saw her. The officer folded the citation and stepped forward, the desert wind tugging gently at the corners of the paper. Kara stood motionless, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on a point just over his shoulder. When he reached her, he lifted his hand first, an officer saluting an enlisted Marine. It was a gesture that carried its own gravity, its own silent acknowledgement of debt. Kara returned the salute, steady but with a faint gloss in her eyes that she refused to let fall. He pinned the medal to her uniform with practiced hands. But the narrator made it clear, the true weight wasn't in the ribbon or the medal. It was in every life spared in that valley. Every Marine who walked away because she chose to climb a rock and expose herself when she could have stayed low and let fate decide. The medal didn't shine with pride. It carried the echo of decisions she made when the world was breaking open. Present arms. The command cracked across the parade deck, sharp and unmistakable. Instantly, a forest of rifles and hands rose in perfect unison. Hundreds of Marines saluted her, not because the order demanded it, but because the moment did. The air felt different, thicker, bound by something deeper than ceremony. Daniels felt his throat tighten as he raised his hand. His mind replayed every careless joke, every smirk, every time he dismissed her as someone who rode along. He remembered seeing her on that ridge, a lone silhouette firing shot after shot while he hid behind a tire, praying. Shame and respect twisted together inside him until he could barely swallow. Myers felt a hollow ache settle beneath his ribs. He had once called her a box check, a meaningless addition to a roster. Now he understood the truth. The only box she had checked was, willing to die for all of you. That realization hit him harder than any reprimand ever had. When the ceremony ended and the formation was dismissed, no one rushed off. Small groups lingered, glancing in her direction but unsure how to bridge the distance between who they had believed she was and who they now knew she had always been. Kara stood quietly, accepting the silence without discomfort. Daniels approached first, hands fidgeting, eyes flicking away and then back. He opened his mouth, the apology catching somewhere between pride and regret. "Staff Sergeant, I shouldn't have." Kara stopped him with a small shake of her head. "You don't owe me words," she said softly. "Just take care of the Marines next time." The simplicity of it struck harder than any lecture. Daniels lowered his gaze, nodding once, a gesture filled with remorse and gratitude all at once. The young Marine she had coached before the mission walked up next. His voice shook as he said, "Ma'am, thank you for saving my life." Kara's expression softened. She rested a hand briefly on his shoulder and told him, "Then make sure you pass on what you learned. Make the next Marine better." It wasn't pride, just duty. The same duty she'd carried through valleys most people would never know existed. Across the deck, the sergeant major watched in silence. He didn't approach her. He didn't need to. The look he gave her carried years of unspoken understanding. He knew moments like this would echo through those young Marines forever. The atmosphere shifted, not loud, not dramatic, but deeply. Conversations softened. Postures straightened. What hovered between everyone wasn't awe, but respect. Genuine, earned, and humbling. The narrator brings the story back to the beginning. The same faces who once snickered in a briefing room now stood with quiet reverence. No more smirks. No more whispered judgments. The room that once seemed indifferent now carried the weight of understanding what true strength looks like. The kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that simply steps forward when the world catches fire. Kara walked away from the fading ceremony, not to bask in anything she'd earned, but to slip back into the rhythm of her duty. She checked on Marines in the barracks. Reminded someone to clean a weapon properly, made sure the young ones who struggled didn't feel alone. She didn't chase recognition. She just lived the same way she always had, as a quiet professional whose courage spoke for itself long before her voice ever could. That night, long after the parade deck had emptied and the sun had bled into darkness, Kara sat alone in her room. The medal rested on the table beside her, its surface catching the yellow glow of the small lamp. Next to it lay the index card she always carried, folded, worn, the edges soft from years of being taken out before every mission. She unfolded it slowly, eyes tracing each name written there in small, neat handwriting. She took a pen, hesitated, then added the names of the Marines lost in the ambush. Her fingers trembled as she wrote, not from fear but from the weight of memory. When she finished, she whispered a few words for them, quiet, personal, spoken only to the stillness of the room. She touched the coordinates tattooed on her wrist, the ink faded but still sharp in her mind. They marked the valley that once nearly broke her. Today she had walked into another valley and refused to let history repeat. It wasn't victory she felt. It was relief mixed with sorrow, a familiar blend she had learned to carry. The citation lay folded beside the medal. She picked it up, ran her thumb along the crease, then slipped it inside the drawer. It would stay there, hidden like every other ribbon, certificate, or commendation she'd earned. When someone asked later about the medal pinned to her uniform, she shrugged lightly and answered the same way she always had. "We all fought. I just had the better view." It wasn't false modesty, it was truth. She never saw herself as a hero or a legend. She saw herself as a Marine who did what needed to be done in the moment it mattered most. The narrator steps back, letting the quiet settle, then speaks directly to the listener. Some heroes walk loudly. Others walk quietly, slipping through our days unnoticed. They sit beside us in grocery store lines, ride buses, teach classes, fix cars, coach kids, or stand alone in corners of rooms where no one thinks to look. They carry entire valleys inside them, memories of nights lit by tracers, of names written on index cards, of decisions made in seconds that shaped the rest of their lives. We rarely know their stories. They rarely tell them. But sometimes, like in that valley with 230 Marines pinned down, the truth steps forward whether it wants to or not. Courage reveals itself not in speeches or swagger, but in the silent resolve of someone who chooses to stand when everyone else is forced to kneel behind cover. And so the moral settles gently but firmly. Respect is not about who talks the loudest. It is about who was willing to stand alone when everyone else was pinned down. Dawn in that valley could have ended in silence, in loss, in names written on someone else's folded card. Instead, a quiet staff sergeant stood where the fire was heaviest and held the line for 230 Marines. Her courage was not loud, not boastful, just steady, deliberate, and deeply human. As you finish this story, take a moment to think about the veterans in your own life who may never speak of what they endured, yet carry memories just as heavy. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These stories keep the courage alive for generations to come.